Welcome everyone to Black Ops 101. Today we are going to be discussing covert operations and exposing some dark secrets about the CIA. Going to blow through lots of material today to try and paint you the big picture of the conspiracy that Q is designed to get rid of. In this episode, I will be explaining how the CIA uses terrorists and criminals as assassins, how they fund Black Ops almost exclusively with heroin and human trafficking, how John McCain was the secret kingpin, how the corrupt news media has always turned a blind eye, and how CIA Black Ops enabled a bunch of worthless European royals to conquer the United States. Our first topic for today is assassins. Assassins have shaped much of world history, from ancient times to modern politics. They've been used to provoke wars, stage coups, derail competitors, and suppress or steal scientific innovations. Whether they care to admit it or not, every leader of every country has assassins they can call if they need to. But no one has more assassins than the CIA and MI6. The first thing any assassin needs to be successful is a good cover or good disguise. Freemasonry is one of the oldest forms of cover for assassins. Back in the day, cities were much smaller and nobody except rich people and royals really traveled, meaning it was really hard to go somewhere new without being immediately noticed and talked about by everyone. So in order to get access to foreign targets, it was easiest to use Freemasons as cover. Expert stonemason subcontractors who traveled together wherever their building skills were needed at a given time. While Freemasons still exist, and some of their symbols are still used as signals by British and American intelligence services, they are rarely used as actual cover anymore. For most of the past century, American assassins used diplomats, aid organizations, and religious missions as cover. That's why the CIA is organized under the State Department. University professors, multinational corporations, and touring musicians have also been used as cover for intelligence operatives throughout our nation's history. But with the advent of smartphones, social media, HD video surveillance, and AI, these covers have become nearly impossible to pull off. That's why intel agencies have shifted to indirect assassination methods, like using terrorists, gangs, mass shooters, and acts of God. Indirect assassination methods have been around for a long time, but they were usually only used in sensitive cases. Like the anarchists who provoked World War I by killing Archduke Ferdinand, and the iceberg, quote-unquote, that took down the Titanic, killing several business moguls that were impeding the establishment of the corrupt U.S. Federal Reserve. These days, with all the technology we have, indirect assassination methods have become standard procedure, which is pretty scary if you think about it, because indirect assassination methods often involve not just killing the target, but lots of innocent bystanders as well. Some examples of indirect assassinations would be the Saudi terrorists on 9/11, the sabotage Boeing planes that crashed in Ethiopia and Indonesia, the Las Vegas concert shooter at Mandalay Bay, and the MS-13 narco children that shot Seth Rich. All are examples of meticulously planned intelligence ops, not just random tragic events they are officially described to be. Many people refer to those tragedies as inside jobs, which is technically false, because the CIA is technically forbidden from conducting operations on American soil. So they launder their criminality by outsourcing the operations conducted here to foreign intel services like MI6. Foreign intel services that have diplomatic immunity, so they legally can't be prosecuted no matter what they do, as well as unrestrained, warrantless access to all of our calls, emails, text messages, and location data through an incredibly shady intelligence sharing agreement we have with them called Five Eyes. Since 1947, MI6 and the CIA have scratched each other's backs by using these outrageous legal loopholes to tee off on each other's quote-unquote problematic domestic political opponents. Problematic American leaders like President John F. Kennedy, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, and civil rights leaders Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., and problematic Anglosphere leaders like Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt and British MP Joe Cox, to name just a few. So that's a little bit about cover. Now on to funding sources. Throughout history, opium, aka heroin, has been a key funding source of clandestine operations. especially European history. Over the past few hundred years, House Wettin, the medieval royal bloodline that secretly controls the world, has used opium and human trafficking to finance their brutal imperial endeavors. Their use of opium as a weapon of war goes back to the days of the Pirates of the Caribbean, when there was an intense rivalry going between Britain and Spain for dominance of the Americas. In the 1500s, the original Queen Elizabeth was feeling left behind, so she authorized a practice called privateering, which essentially is a legal version of piracy, where she would use private mercenaries to attack and plunder Spanish treasure ships carrying gold back from the Americas. It was a way for Queen Elizabeth to get a piece of the action without provoking a full-scale war with Spain, who was way bigger and badder than them at the time. During this period, British operatives pioneered many of the clandestine tactics and networks they ultimately used to become the preeminent world superpower they became in the 1800s. Tactics such as using opium, aka heroin, and human trafficking to fund pirate colonies throughout the Caribbean to keep the money flowing when there weren't Spanish ships to attack. The name MI6 comes from this time period. It's short for Marine Intelligence Unit 666, which at the time was a cheeky Satanism reference, clowning on the Spanish conquistadors' pretense of brutally colonizing America so they could bring the native peoples to God. The British had a mantra of pioneers take the arrows, settlers take the land. So they would often let other imperial powers go places first and bear the tremendous upfront costs of building colonial outposts before sending their spies and assassins to hijack them by force. Later on, after they defeated the Spanish Armada, the British reorganized their savage horde of pirates into the East India Company, which they then used as the primary vehicle of their ruthless imperialism for the next several hundred years. At its peak, the British East India Company had a private army of about 260,000 men, roughly twice the size of the British Army, and they dominated opium and slave trafficking worldwide. It served as the tip of the British military spear, directly ruling over India for over 100 years and eventually going to war with China for trying to outlaw their heroin dealing. Twice, as a matter of fact. The Chinese government still cites the opium wars to this day whenever they're called out for selling fentanyl to Mexican drug cartels. Heroin dealing is such a staple of British power that they use a poppy pin instead of a yellow ribbon to honor their dead soldiers. Poppies are the flower that heroin is derived from. The British royals claim that the poppy was adopted after World War I because it symbolized the flowers that grew in the fields after the battles took place. But it's really because they used heroin-financed anarchist assassins to incite a vast war, seize key territories in the Middle East, and consolidate vast power over Europe, Africa, and the rest of the world. Power they would use to set the stage for another major world war that would give them the opportunity to conquer back their ultimate prize, the United States of America. As World War II was breaking out, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a slimy robber baron heir whose grandfather made his fortune smuggling heroin to China, allowed British intelligence to come over and essentially build the precursor to the CIA, called OSS, from the ground up, teaching Americans all the gangsterific spy agency tactics they had developed over the centuries. From that point on, British and American intel ops became deeply intertwined, especially when it came to controlling organized crime and using it to finance covert operations. The idea was sold to American leaders on the pretense that drug dealing and prostitution was going to happen either way, so they might as well control it and use the money that it generates for their ops. But that always was a pipe dream, and what really ended up happening was the United States getting corrupted from within and dragged into endless foreign wars. Wars that are ultimately used to enact the medieval imperial agenda of the British Empire and to facilitate more heroin cultivation, like in Vietnam and Afghanistan. Ever thought about how weird it is that Afghanistan is currently growing 3 times as much heroin as it was when we invaded in 2001? But as I mentioned earlier, drug dealing isn't the only funding source for our intelligence operations. Human trafficking is too. Human trafficking is another ancient industry controlled by intelligence services, and it is even more sadistic than the heroin game. If you've ever seen the movie Taken, that sort of a situation where the girl is being sold off at auction is very real and happens much more often than you'd think. Another good depiction is the Avicii music video, For a Better Day. If you ever wonder why Avicii was suicided, look no further than that video he made. And they don't just use sex trafficking to raise money, they also use it to exercise power. If you've ever seen the movie Red Sparrow with Jennifer Lawrence, you'll see a depiction of what's called a honeypot, or a special type of spy operation that lures powerful men into compromising sexual activities and then uses the pictures from that activity to blackmail them. British and American spy agencies frequently use this method to exercise control over billionaires who aren't afraid of politicians. That's why they created Jeffrey Epstein and Sex Island, to use as a mega honeypot. Epstein would get rich and powerful people to have sex with children so he could get compromising photos on them and own them for life. That's why Robert Mueller stepped in and got him off with a slap on the wrist when Acosta tried to prosecute him in Florida. Because as the documents clearly state, Epstein belonged to intelligence. Pretty crazy, right? And they let most of the other small-time traffickers run wild too. I witnessed this firsthand doing overnight IT work for hotel chains like Hilton, Marriott, Embassy Suites, Hamilton Inn, and La Quinta. How young girls would go into a room early in the evening and have different men coming and going every hour, almost all night long. And how major hotel chains and local police brazenly look the other way as child sex trafficking is happening right under their noses. When I brought it up with one of the governor's top officials, how people in power are turning a blind eye to corruption, he shrugged and said everyone does that, Republicans and Democrats. And he's not wrong, unfortunately. That ridiculous attitude is why the website Backpage was created and launched in Arizona. Backpage was essentially a giant Craigslist for prostitutes that operated on a worldwide scale. Backpage turbocharged our human trafficking problem, enriching criminal gangs and their CIA overlords in the process. It made pimping so easy that their only problem was what to do with all that money they were making. Which brings me to how I originally discovered the CIA's gangbanging racket, through its money laundering ops here in Arizona. Several of whom are my customers, businesses I sold point-of-sale systems to. Turns out I have lots of friends in common with the guy who was the CIA's head gangbanger. Someone you might recognize. If you've ever seen the TV show Scandal, there's a shadowy covert intelligence agency called B6, which is an artistic rendition of the real thing called D6, the covert paramilitary wing of the CIA. Both in the show and in real life, the guy who runs covert operations is called Command and doesn't answer to anyone, not even the president. The purpose of the Command role in real life was to organize black ops around an admiral, a top military leader that would be able to operate on 30 to 40 year time horizons as opposed to a series of presidents who operate on 4 to 8. Admiralty law in the military was created before a time of instantaneous communications, so it gives Navy admirals legal authority to order strikes without pre-approval from the president. It was intended to be used for situations where an enemy surprise attacks and the admiral needs to order an immediate response to avoid catastrophe. But over the years, it turned into a corrupt loophole used to order assassinations, with or without the consent of the elected president. Command also functions as a very important PR figurehead. All of the CIA mockingbirds in the mainstream media echo Command talking points verbatim, manufacturing the public consent they need to perpetuate their racket regime change wars. As I mentioned earlier, John McCain was Command, the guy secretly running D6. Almost everything our kangaroo news media tells us about McCain is false, especially the idea that he was some kind of patriotic veteran who was always putting his country first. In real life, he was actually a vicious war criminal and an opioid-addicted pedophile who saw himself as more of a European king than an American serviceman. That's why he constantly bragged about his royal ancestry and always used his power to enact the imperial agenda of those worthless European royals instead of using it to protect the interests of the American people. To understand how John McCain became command, we need to understand a little bit about his background. John McCain was born on a military base in the Panama Canal Zone, land which had just been broken off from Colombia by a US-backed puppet revolution. While in Panama, he made friends with Colombian rebels that would assist him in future endeavors. Throughout his childhood, John McCain did terrible in school. All of his classmates and teachers thought he was a total prick. Like his obnoxious daughter, he was a snotty little brat who got everything handed to him on a silver platter because of who his powerful father was. One of the top admirals in the Navy, akin to something like military royalty. While in the Naval Academy, his teachers and classmates nicknamed him McNasty because he was such an arrogant jerk to everyone. He graduated almost last in his class, and the only reason he wasn't expelled is because his father was an admiral and could keep getting him out of trouble. After graduating, he bounced around in a few roles before deciding to become a fighter pilot. While he was training, he crashed 3 separate military jets, all due to pilot error. The first was off the coast of Texas. The second was in Spain when he was trying to showboat and accidentally took out a power line, causing a major power outage and sparking a major international incident. The third one was one of the military training jets his corrupt admiral father would let him use for personal weekend joyrides to see girlfriends and sporting events in other states. The McCain family perfectly epitomizes the insane nepotism corrupting our military. Any other pilot would have been grounded after one crash, but John was untouchable because his father was an admiral. On his very first deployment, John recklessly caused a major fire on the deck of the USS Forrestal that killed 134 of his fellow seamen. After again facing zero consequences for his actions, he was reassigned to another ship and back in action almost immediately. He was shot down in Vietnam after disobeying a direct stand-down order while trying to bomb a light bulb factory. The only reason they were able to shoot him down is because, once again, he wasn't following established Navy procedures and flying at the right altitude, which made him an easy target. He was severely injured in the crash and immediately turned on the United States in exchange for medical treatment. Being the son of the admiral that was running the war, Songbird McCain was able to provide mountains of invaluable intel to the Viet Cong, intel they used to shoot down many more American pilots. It was during this time that he developed his lifelong addiction to opioids. He was never actually tortured. That's just a lie made up to justify his treason. Because he was such a huge liability, providing so much damaging intel to the enemy, the Navy made a prisoner swap deal to get him out as soon as possible. But in the political power move of the century, John refused release until his fellow prisoners were freed. He pretended it was a selfless and patriotic act, and the news media ate it up hook, line, and sinker. But the real reason he refused to be released was because he wanted to avoid being court-martialed for treason. After a few years, he was eventually pardoned by President Nixon as part of a power struggle with military leaders over leaving the war in Vietnam. The instant he got home, he immediately ditched his wife and child who had been anxiously waiting years and years for his return and started an extramarital affair with Cindy Hensley, a crime family heiress from Arizona. Another great example of how ruthless and cold-hearted this guy was. After divorcing his first wife and remarrying Cindy Hensley in 1980, the stage was set. And he took over the D6 command role by default after his father died unexpectedly in 1981. His dad, John McCain II, or Admiral McCain, was the original command. Admiral McCain originally got the job when the OSS was restructured into the CIA in 1947 because he ran the Navy Signals Intelligence base in Italy after the war. At the time, the Navy was who ran all U.S. signals intelligence, so the CIA had to work through them to facilitate their spying and gangbanging. Admiral McCain, along with some of his other insanely corrupt admiral friends, were some of the first naive buffoons to buy into the idea of a new world order. They worked with vile racketeers like CIA Director John Dulles to import mobsters from places like Italy, Sicily, and Ireland and helped them take over many of America's major cities. When his son took over in 1981, he immediately shifted the focus away from the Italian and Irish mobsters his dad preferred and instead ramped up operations with his old amigos in the Colombian cartels, people he knew from his childhood in Panama, leading to the cocaine and crack epidemic throughout the 80s and 90s. He also ingratiated himself with the crime families of Arizona, like Charles Keating, and got himself into Congress by taking over the seat held by John Jacob Rhodes, the sketchy MI6 double agent who helped swift-boat President Nixon for leaving the war in Vietnam. After a couple of terms in Congress, he took over the Senate seat of another Nixon-sniping MI6 00 gangster named Barry Goldwater. Rhodes and Goldwater were the worthless, fake do-gooding rhinos of their day. Being in Congress provided John McCain the access and legal immunities he needed to run D6 efficiently. Another thing that really helped was the partnership he made with the Clintons that provided them assassins and saboteurs to cover for their corruption in exchange for favorable coverage in the media mafia he needed to cover for his corruption. This secret partnership enabled them to sell us out while enriching themselves with racket charities funded primarily by foreign robber barons. The Saudis, the Soroses, and the Rothschilds, aka the Eye, ushering in an unprecedented worldwide era of wanton corruption and sadistic violence. From El Salvador to Libya to Syria to Ukraine to Kyrgyzstan, John McCain sowed chaos, degeneracy, and violence everywhere he went. Especially out here in Arizona. Arizona is still very much the Wild West. Marauding Depression-era crime families operate with virtual impunity here to this very day. Families like the Hensleys, John McCain's in-laws who control commercial alcohol distribution, and families like the Bashas, who run a prominent local grocery store chain started in the 1930s. A huge amount of the drug and human trafficking happening in the United States today is facilitated directly by the Hensleys, Bashas, McCains, and their cartel partners like El Mayo, El Chapo, and the Los Salazar family who runs Sonora. Drug laws are aggressively enforced in Arizona, but anyone operating under the McCain Associates umbrella, aka the CIA umbrella, gets a free pass. Because if they do get caught, the corrupt FBI Phoenix Field office will call and order local law enforcement to stand down. The FBI can even stand down other federal agencies like the Border Patrol. One call is all it takes. They can also force Border Patrol to release anyone they catch or hand over any evidence that they collect. And it's perfectly legal because the FBI, by law, has jurisdictional supremacy over everything. I have many confidential sources in the Border Patrol who are very frustrated with the alarming frequency of those stand-down orders, especially in the Yuma to Vegas corridor where most of the real traffic comes in. Agents that will be leading patrols about to catch a bunch of smugglers out in the desert who, right as they're about to make the grab, will get calls from the FBI standing them down and forcing them to back off. And we don't need to take their word for it to see that the federal government is totally unserious about stopping trafficking in the Yuma corridor. We could just look at the publicly available numbers. If you look here, you'll see that Border Patrol keeps way less agents in the Yuma corridor than in the Tucson corridor. They claim it's because there's less traffic coming through Yuma, but anyone who knows Arizona knows that's a preposterous lie. The reason is simple: geography. The Tucson Corridor is an unbelievably treacherous desert covered in sharp rocky hills, thorn bushes, and chollas, and doesn't have a lot of other foot traffic to serve as cover. So while there's many smugglers getting caught in the Tucson Corridor, they're just the small fish that serve as decoys for the big boys coming through Yuma. The Yuma Corridor is a relatively mild sandy desert with minimal vegetation and lots of random people riding around on quads and dirt bikes near both sides of the border. And just north of Yuma and east of Yuma are a bunch of bombing ranges used for training military pilots. Vast quarantined areas followed by huge wildlife refuges that make big-time traffickers unlikely to encounter any law enforcement as they make their way up to Vegas. Shipments are also brought through the grocery store bashes via underground tunnels and secretly loaded onto military planes at the Yuma MCAS airbase by the private refueling subcontractors, before being flown across the country to its final destination. Little known fact about the Hoover Dam outside Las Vegas is that it was originally built to control the water flow to Yuma so the mafia could extort the people, who are mostly farmers, into facilitating their smuggling. To this day, those same Depression-era crime families continue their gangbanging with impunity. Anyone who crosses them gets killed or railroaded by the feds, even Sheriff Joe. Sheriff Joe was king shit around here until he disobeyed a stand-down order, raided one of McCain's trap houses, and arrested one of Flaky Jeff's top aides red-handed. The second he did that, Sheriff Joe went from untouchable to being aggressively railroaded by the feds. Those sneaky little CIA Mormons seem innocent, but they do not mess around if you impede on one of their smuggling operations. That's why they've been getting into those vicious blood feuds with the cartels in Mexico lately. And they aren't the only ones doing sketchy stuff out here in Arizona. I also had the unique privilege of infiltrating a weird little NGO called Jewish Voice, a charity with embassy-level security that runs a hokey prosperity gospel-style TV broadcast network which fundraises tens of millions of dollars for foreign aid. It's weird though because they always seem to show up with tons of cash in the weirdest places at the weirdest times. Like Zimbabwe around the time Mugabe was taking power, Rwanda around the time those Hutus went crazy, and Ukraine right as those regime change protests were ramping up in 2015. Being there reminded me of that movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage, because I knew much of the money pumped into those countries was actually used to buy weapons. If you've never seen it, you should check it out because it's a great depiction of how CIA arms trafficking to evil despots and dictators all over the world has skyrocketed since John took over command from his pops. Another great movie is American Made with Tom Cruise, depicting the CIA drug finance gun running out of Arkansas. That covert operation is what laid the groundwork for the secret Clinton-McCain partnership. Super annoying how our government lets vicious gangs brutalize us in our own country to raise money for their foreign rackets. But equally annoying how our news media enables them. Because the corrupt stooges who run our government wouldn't survive long if journalists would ever report the truth. But they won't. They never have, and they never will. People like to think that fake news is a recent development. But the reality is that the news has always been fake. The term yellow journalism was coined way back in the 1890s to describe a media climate very similar to the one we have today, where 95% of all media is owned by 5 bloodthirsty corporations. Corporations who have no commitment to truth and no loyalty to the United States. Just endless greed and corruption. Now, many silly boomers will push back on that because they like to romanticize about how there was a time back in their day when the media at least tried to be objective. But that is hilariously false. The media in their day watched our president get trotted out in the open by his own security team, have his head blown off in broad daylight, and never push back a single time when it was explained away with a bunch of nakedly preposterous lies. Then they saw no issue with letting some of the co-conspirators in that murderous coup run the official investigation of it. Then they let not just 1, but 2 of those co-conspirators become the president, because the news has always been fake. Everything about the news industry in America is fake. Their esteemed heroes, Woodward and Bernstein, are the opposite of real journalists. They are actually Mockingbird stooges who were served up their bombshell stories on a silver platter by the crooked FBI as part of a highly coordinated CIA coup, similar to the Russiagate coup that the CIA coordinated against Donald Trump. Their top journalism award, called the Pulitzer Prize, was created by Columbia University after a bloodthirsty robber baron gave them millions of dollars to create a journalism school in his corrupt image. The kangaroo news media is a big part of the reason we had to do QAnon this way. Because if we didn't, the media's reputation might have survived intact, which would leave us vulnerable to more evil politicians in the future. Now that they took the bait, charged straight into our ambush, and rallied to the defense of obvious war criminals, racketeers, and pedophiles, nothing can stop what has come. They are all going down hard. And it's funny because they always act like us QAnon folks are the violent extremists. But they will get to see who the real violent extremists are very soon, when those left-wing mobs they've been sicking on us learn the truth about their treachery and turn on them. I reckon nothing will be able to save them then. Not even all those police officers they've been relentlessly slandering. So let them enjoy their last few moments on top, because I have a feeling those smug kangaroo journalists are not going to fare very well out here in the wild. So with all that being said, I'd like to close with a public service announcement. Spooks, sicarios, and robber barons, be advised. D6 is officially canceled, and your treachery will no longer be tolerated. John McCain's despicable legacy will rest in the ash heap of history where it belongs. And anyone else engaged in acts of war against the United States of America better stop and disappear immediately. Or on behalf of the DIA, I will personally hunt them down and make a flamboyant example out of them. If you don't believe me, just ask Slimy Stanton's old amigo Paul Lopez. Things got a little bit heated between us after Paul decided to choose Team Satan over Team America. Hopefully the rest of you spooky little wanksters won't make the same mistake. Goodbye. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Space Force. But before we do that, I wanted to address a few other things first. The first of which is the coronavirus. Lots of people have been asking me what the deal is with that. And I can't say much about it at the moment. But what I can say is that DIA is currently in the final stages of suffocating the Royal Death Racket. And as that evil monster dies, it's going to thrash around and try to take as many innocent people down with it as possible. So while I don't necessarily think that the virus is something you should be panicking about, I do absolutely recommend that everyone follow the official instructions and do not leave your home unless absolutely necessary. For the next few weeks at least. I know it sucks, I hate being cooped up as well, but please just take my word on this one and stay home even if you aren't afraid of coronavirus. I also recommend, if you can, that you buy some Bitcoin or Ripple, because financial markets are going to be in for a super rough ride here as the storm enters its final stage. I'll elaborate on that in a future video. Moving on, I'd like to say great job with the data blockade, everyone. Those corporate vampires are pretty stunned right now, so it will probably take them a couple days to digest all of this and respond. I try to make things as obvious as possible by issuing direct threats over Twitter, so they can easily observe my star power and know that we will not stop suffocating them until they give us our archive back. So thanks for the help, Q-Horde, and let's keep this intense pressure up on Datto. It's really costing them a lot right now, so we're doing pretty good. For those of you who've been whining at me about how that's too harsh, I have just one question. Would you rather me just kill everyone that gets in my way like a maniac? Because that's how my predecessor did things. So try to have a little perspective, please. Next up, I wanted to clarify some spy lingo for you. The difference between agents and officers. So you all know, I'm not a DIA officer, I'm a DIA agent. Officers are internal employees, whereas agents are external subcontractors. Agents are not on the official employee roster, nor are they on the official payroll. Meaning, I am totally off book and you won't find a single thing about me in the official DoD employee database. Which is a really good thing, because if I was listed in there, I would have been hunted down and killed like all those other American spies when OPM got hacked in 2015. So I dodged a bullet on that one. Literally. Moving on to Space Force, saw some people talking about how I was going to be running the Space Force out of my new house. Which is incorrect, but that's my fault for not being more clear. Space Force is not what's going to be run out of my new house. Black Ops is. Space Force is actually run out of Luke Air Force Base, which is going to be renamed to Luke Space Force Base after we get done disbanding the Air Force. Like the CIA, which we are also disbanding, the Air Force is an irredeemably compromised organization. One that was also founded in 1947. In fact, guess whose drones the CIA uses for their outrageously indiscriminate airstrikes? If you guessed the Air Force's, you would be correct. Now most of you are probably thinking, come on weird computer guy, how is it exactly that you think you're going to be disbanding the Air Force? And the answer is simple, I'm not. I'm just promising all their other fun toys besides space and cyber to the Army, the Navy, and the Marines, all three of which already have their own Air Forces. And they're the ones that are going to help me pull apart the Air Force. Cool, right? We're also going to disband that cesspit of graft and corruption known as NASA and roll that in as well. Also air traffic control from the FAA. I'll be discussing that in a bit more detail in my next video. Now many of you are probably wondering, why in the world would they put a weird computer guy like me in charge of running a major branch of the military? And the main reason is simple, because Space Force is actually taking over control of the internet and providing free Wi-Fi to everyone via a massive mesh network of satellites. Pretty exciting, right? And the best part is that many of those satellites have already been launched. Because the Space Force already exists. It's just been hiding out in one of our top defense contractors. Can you guess which one? If you guessed SpaceX, you would be correct. SpaceX, believe it or not, is actually a DIA front that has secretly been building our new Space Force. Ever notice how some of their top executives have cheeky little names like Gwen Shotwell? If you've been following SpaceX, you probably know that we're well underway with launching that massive network of satellites that will provide reliable high-speed Wi-Fi to everyone. The project is called Starlink. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to check out SpaceX on Twitter and see some of the awesome things that the new Space Force is up to. There are several reasons why it's become necessary for the military to take control of the internet. The first one is cybersecurity. We live in an increasingly techie world, and with all these sophisticated hacking tools that are out there for free, it's going to be impossible to keep everyone safe without controlling the internet. Especially as we start to roll out these self-driving cars Waymo's been testing here in Arizona. Don't know about you guys, but I am definitely not trying to get killed by a hacked self-driving car. The second reason the military needs to control the internet is power. Right now, it's impossible for our government to regulate big tech, because big tech controls the internet and all of our access to information. So there's really nothing our government can do to stop them, even if they wanted to. The tech monopolies also have more money than God, meaning that they have the best lawyers and lobbyists money can buy on their payroll in every single country. So even if we did manage to regulate them here, they could just shift operations to another country and keep right on censoring our free speech and illegally stealing our data. The only way we are ever going to be able to rein in those tech monopolies is by having the military take control of the internet. It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but I guarantee that my Space Force will do a much better job of protecting everyone's constitutional rights than those evil tech CEOs will. So hopefully you guys won't trip, because what's not to love about free Wi-Fi for everyone, right? Well, that's all for now. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time for part 2 of our Space Force introduction. Welcome back, everyone. Today I'd like to touch on a concept I discussed in my previous video to help you understand the big picture with Q. If you've watched my headliner video, Black Ops 101, you probably know that all the covert operations conducted in the United States military are organized around a top leader called Command. Command is a very unique role, one that is totally off book and comes with almost unlimited legal immunity from prosecution. It's like having the star power from that Super Mario game where you temporarily become invincible and can run straight through all the bad guys. As most of you are likely aware by now, I am the new Command for the whole United States. The guy who's going to be running Black Ops for the next 40 years or so. Pretty crazy, right? Now, I know 40 years might sound scary to some of you, but you don't have to worry because I am dramatically different from my predecessor. The most important difference between us is that command is now a DIA thing instead of a CIA thing, meaning that I'm organized under the Department of Defense, so I can't just wantonly disobey orders from the president like those little royal wannabes at the State Department. The other huge difference between us is that instead of funding black ops with heroin and human trafficking gangs run by vile robber barons like the Saudis, the Soros, and the Rothschilds, I'm just going to fund them out of my own pocket with this multi-billion-dollar mountain of cryptocurrency that I've been collecting. So long story short, I'm something like the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, if you've ever seen Game of Thrones. Meaning that it's now my job to identify and eliminate threats to our national security. Threats like tech companies who engage in acts of war against the United States of America by aiding and abetting foreign enemy combatants like Queen Satan with aggressive censorship of our free speech. If you saw my last video, you probably know that we just began our first Q Army economic blockade against a major corporation called Datto. Datto has been a key vendor for many of the top IT service providers for quite a while now. But with their recent acquisition of Autotask Corporation, they are now one of the largest and most sophisticated tech companies in the entire world. So sophisticated that they've already crafted a successful defense against our flooding attack this weekend. How they did that was by programming a filter onto their mail servers that weeds out messages containing unique keywords from the pre-written message I had you send them. The keywords Austin, Steinbart, and amorphous. Note that only amorphous was a keyword instead of amorphous archive. This is because they don't want to install any filters on words that would weed out legitimate customer traffic, like archive. Pretty savvy, right? But not to worry. We are just going to make a slight adjustment and go right back at them. A great example of why I need real people to help me with the storm instead of just bots. Because real people can think up and send unique messages of their own. Ones that don't use those blacklisted keywords so that they can make it past those flood filters. So the next step in our economic blockade against Datto is going to be twofold. The first step is to make your own Mad Lib out of this template I made for you and send it in an email to these 5 email addresses: billing@datto.com, sales@datto.com, partners@datto.com, legal@datto.com, and support@datto.com. That should cover all our bases on the email front. The second step is to call a support line I'm going to list in the description below and dial 9, which will take you to their emergency after-hours support. I would be super grateful for as much time as you could spare to volunteer to help me encumber their emergency tech support line. Ideally, you could call and wait till someone picks up and tell them to give us our archive back when they do. But if you can't, any amount of time you could volunteer to help block up that phone line would really help. Blocking up that phone line will dramatically inhibit their ability to support their highest paying customers and will dramatically raise the cost of their unconstitutional censorship. I'll write up the instructions for this economic blockade and put them in the description below so you guys can have that for after the video. Moving on, there's been lots of confusion out there as to who exactly is in charge here at Q. So I'd like to clarify some things around the command structure of this mission. The best analogy I can give you to explain the Q command structure is the Christian Trinity. Please understand that by making this analogy, I am absolutely not claiming to be Jesus, God, or anything even remotely close. I'm just going to use this because it's an extremely relatable analogy for a lot of people to help me explain this very complicated situation that we're in. So please don't get mad at me. In this Christian Trinity analogy, Q plus is the Father, the one who knows everything and who planned and led this whole operation. Subordinate to the Father is the Son and the Holy Spirit. Baby Q, aka yours truly, is the Son in this example. The one who interfaces with the people and endures lots of their obnoxiousness, abuse, and hatred in service of the Father's big picture plan. Everyone else is the Holy Spirit. Trump, the DIA, Admiral Rogers, and General Flynn are all part of the Holy Spirit in this example, meaning that they are all subordinate to and operating at the direction of Q+. This command structure is very important because it shields people who don't have star power immunities like I do from civil liability. People like General Flynn, who have already had their life ruined enough by those worthless McVampires over the past few years. In my previous video, I messed up big time and said that General Flynn would appreciate it if you helped me. So I just wanted to take a second and clarify that General Flynn would appreciate your help in the general abstract sense of how, as an ex-serviceman, he wants all of the threats to our country to be eliminated. Not in the sense that he was personally calling or condoning that target, or any other target for that matter. Because if he did, that would expose General Flynn to the potential of prosecution and civil lawsuits. So I just want to make it crystal clear that I am the new command and that targeting is 100% at my discretion. Capiche? Okay, great. Another quick thing I wanted to address is I've been seeing a lot of people out there talking about JFK Jr. Please understand, everyone, that JFK Jr. is in fact dead. And that is just a nickname that some people call me because of my lifelong vendetta against the Royal Death Racket. Like when I played basketball and I was good at shooting, I got nicknamed Larry Bird. Doesn't mean that I'm actually Larry Bird, it just means that I have a cool nickname. I apologize if that was previously unclear. So no Q-proof ending tonight because I already dropped you a huge hint on the boards yesterday pertaining to that Ephesians verse I told you about in my last video. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out and let me know if you think that timing was just a coincidence. And enjoy this other thing I found to amuse you with instead. Did you guys know that the mascot for the Sinaloa cartel is a scorpion? Pretty spooky, right? Luckily, here at Q, we aren't afraid of any hocus spooky bugs. When I was little, catching these things was one of my favorite things to do as a kid. They can't see very well and their tail isn't very strong, so if you distract them from the front and pick them up by their tail like this, they can't get you with their nasty little stinger. And these little pinchers can't even really break your skin, so they're nothing to worry about. Have a great night. I'll see you guys next time. Happy Friday, everyone. Quick video today about the Russia hacks. First thing you need to know is that Hillary didn't lose 33,000 emails. She actually lost 55,000. The only reason they said 33 was because that is one of those hokey Freemason symbols they like to use to signal the cowardly robber baronaires who run the media. You may have noticed other times where a terrorist attack had 33 victims or a trendy cause had 33 volunteers. When you see that number in news stories, oftentimes it means that was an intelligence operation. It's kind of like a little marker. That little Mickey Mouse CIA director, Johnny Brennan, is absolutely obsessed with the number 33. Because he's a dorky little Freemason who thinks it's so spooky to threaten people with numbers. And it works quite well with those clucking hens in the media, amazingly enough. But here at Q, we aren't afraid of any hooky spooky numbers. In fact, we have a hooky spooky number of our own. 17. That's what we use to sign our work. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is that those Russia hacks are totally made up by the CIA. I know because I looked into them myself. Pedophile Podesta was hacked by what's called a spearfish, a spam email with a malicious link inside of it. Here it is right here. If you notice the date, this is 2 days before the emails cut off in the hacked archive. Because as you can see, Pedophile Podesta clicked on a fake password reset link and typed his password into a fake website. That's why he got hacked. Because like a dumb little pedophile, he straight up gave his password away. Not because of Russia. And to be honest, the sophistication level of this attack indicates that it was more likely a Russian teenager in his parents' basement than a professional Russian intelligence operation. Aside from how obviously fake this spearphishing email looks, and how Google doesn't use bit.ly short links, it also had some other ridiculously suspicious attributes. Like using Russian language malware and having a timestamp that was in Moscow and conducted during Moscow business hours. Meaning that if we are to believe the official story that our lying FBI is telling us, that would be the metaphorical equivalent of believing that Vladimir Putin rode into a bank shirtless on that show horse that he loved so much while wearing a Russia flag as a cape and robbed it at gunpoint. That's how nakedly preposterous the FBI's Russia intel assessment was. The next lie was the Clinton emails and the DNC emails, which actually weren't hacked at all. We can easily tell by looking at the data transfer rates in the metadata of the OST archive files released by WikiLeaks. I won't bore you with a bunch of technical jargon, but long story short, we have indisputable evidence that those emails were downloaded onto a USB flash drive and carried out of the building by hand, not hacked. We also know from a separate WikiLeaks release that the CIA has a cyber weapon that can falsely make it look like Russia hacked someone. One they use quite a bit to cover for their own rackets, and one that they let CrowdStrike use for their fake report. We also know that those little racketeers at CrowdStrike received $100 million to blame Russia, and that the FBI never even looked into the evidence a single time. In fact, the FBI not only didn't look into the evidence a single time, they also accepted a fake report from CrowdStrike that was half redacted by Hillary's lawyers. How crazy is that? It's like, here you go, Mr. FBI agent. Here's that evidence you've been asking for. Oh wait, hold on. Let me black half of it out real quick. So preposterously corrupt that it's hard to figure out why in the world the FBI is even still allowed to exist at all. Almost as hard as it is to figure out why Ronna McDaniel, the lady that currently runs the National Republican Party, gave Hillary's goons over at CrowdStrike the contract to secure all of the Republican Party's computers for the upcoming election. Yep, I'm not joking. That sneaky little CIA Mormon let Hillary's goons straight in the front door to come snake us again. The deal she made effectively gives CrowdStrike direct access to all Republican data. Data about our strategies, our donors, our voters, and everything else. And none of the other Republican morons in Congress seem to have a problem with this. They all have full confidence in Ronna. Which is why we need to loudly demand that those Republican morons get their heads out of their asses and fire that sneaky little CIA Mormon immediately. Because if we don't get her fired ASAP, we will most certainly lose in November. The CIA will have our whole playbook, and they will aggressively use it to sabotage us. I'm being dead serious. This is not a joke. And this is not a drill. This is crunch time, and every move we make from here on out matters tremendously. So in addition to calling for the removal of Mitt Romney's niece, Ronna McDaniel, I'm also announcing the official end of all hooky spooky number games. You hear that, Freemasons? I did use the number 33 out of the Raytheon rulebook one last time to antagonize the clucking hens in the press, showing them that I know their game and that game is now over. So anyone still taking cues from the number 33 is not operating at the direction of the US military. From here on out, we are not going to be sneaky little snakes anymore. If we have a problem with somebody, we're just going to come out and say it. We aren't going to pretend to be nice in public and threaten people behind closed doors. Because that's super whack, and it prevents regular people from having informed opinions about things. Here at Q, we want people from all walks of life to be able to see exactly what is happening in our foreign policy and voice their opinions in an informed way. That's how democracies should work, not with all this fakeness and sneaking. So with that being said, I'd like to make a public service announcement to Queen Margrethe of Denmark. Be advised, Queen, you have two options. You can either save some face and accept our incredibly generous offer to buy Greenland, land which you have no legitimate claim to in the first place. Or we could call up some Jaysakis and they could come run up in that royal palace and Roman off you, if you catch my drift. Q loves the people of Denmark, so they have absolutely nothing to worry about. But Q will feel 0% bad if something terrible happens to Denmark's despicable imperialist queen. So we'll give her 30 days to decide. Hopefully she chooses correctly. Because if not, we will light her up and take her cookies by force. And we'll have a jolly good time doing so. Kobe! Welcome back and great job, everyone. You really helped me put the smackdown on that clown lawyer the other day. Since I posted that video, that slimy jet-setted clown has had his comms completely jammed. Both his cell phone and his office phone have been ringing off the hook, and his email inbox are getting blown up as well. Meaning that we have effectively waged our first economic blockade on a high-profile target. Congratulations, everyone. This sort of irregular warfare is going to be a big part of our mission over the next couple of months. We're going to be using my star power combined with the vast power of your collective voices to give the McVampires a taste of their own medicine. Our next target is Datto, the tech company hosting the Amorphous Archive. Datto has decided that they want to cover for the corrupt CIA and arbitrarily took down the Amorphous Archive. By taking that down, Datto is not only violating our First Amendment rights, they are also threatening our national security by aiding and abetting foreign enemy combatants like Queen Satan, one of the primary evil monsters we're working to defeat. It's a direct act of war against the American people, and it will not be tolerated. So starting tonight, we will be launching an economic blockade against Datto until they decide to give us our Amorphous Archive back. How we're going to do that is very simple. We are going to degrade and destroy their ability to support their customers by blowing up their tech support email. Every time we send an email to support@datto.com, a ticket is automatically created in their system. So by flooding that email with thousands of messages demanding our archive back, we can create tons of fake tickets and dramatically inhibit their ability to support their customers. If they do not give us our archive back by Monday, we will start flooding their phone lines and their billing email system as well, choking off more and more of their ability to operate their business every day until they either give us our files back or go out of business. Their choice. Now, many of you are probably thinking to yourselves, why Datto? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? And the answer is no. Because this isn't just about Datto. This is about sending all the CEOs in Silicon Valley a huge message. A message that scares the shit out of them and makes them understand that if they continue to get in the way of us fixing our country, we will mercilessly suffocate each and every one of their companies. Doesn't matter how big and bad they think they are. Doesn't matter how much money or power they have. Those corporations will be suffocated if they get in our way. Now, normally, online brigading like this would be shut down, but this is a special star power exception to that rule because if we don't aggressively move to protect our rights now, those Silicon Valley tech giants will most certainly rig the election against us. And we will lose our freedom forever. That might sound like an exaggeration, but I promise you, with the artificial intelligence technology they have now, that is not a joke. This is crunch time, and we need all hands on deck. So if you want to help, please email support@datto.com and help me demand our Amorphous Archive back. If you're unsure what to write, I'll put a pre-written template in the description section below for you to copy and paste. Understand that the efforts of every single individual person in this movement matters tremendously at this point in the game. So I'm hoping that you all answer this call to action like you did with that slimy lawyer and help me get our files back ASAP. Any help you can provide to that end would be greatly appreciated by both me and by General Flynn. Tonight I also need to take some time to call out some of these shallow Q Pharisees who are currently acting like the kangaroo news media. Ones like Joe M., Jordan Sather, Lisa Mae Crowley, and Praying Medic. Big accounts currently stirring up trouble against myself, my family, and my followers, despite never actually having watched any of my videos. I know because I have tracking cookies. Yep, you heard me correctly. Those big name Q Pharisees are slandering me without ever having looked at the evidence even a single time. Meaning that their hatred is 100% based on feelings at this point. So much so that they are all still even conflating me with totally anonymous morons like that I the Spy guy who never even provided a picture or a single tangible piece of evidence whatsoever. Isn't that outrageous? Guy doesn't even have a name. It's like, do they even have a brain? Because if they did, they would realize that the no outside comms thing was actually posted on the Chans, and that they are currently taking orders from 8kun. So technically they aren't even following the no outside comms rule. And they haven't been for some time now. Pretty hypocritical, right? Did you guys know that they also conspire behind the scenes to coordinate messaging like clicky little hens? Exactly what the mainstream media does. They even all blocked me at around the same time, so they can keep on baselessly slandering and stirring up trouble against me without me being able to respond. Pretty cowardly, right? Believe it or not, I've had more trouble with them inciting idiots to come harass me than I have with almost anyone else. Other than the CIA, of course. How crazy is that? The people claiming to rep Q the most are the ones refusing to look at any hard evidence, refusing to talk to anyone they disagree with, and sending their stupid followers after me while simultaneously using my operation as a can shake. Those vitriolic haters love to do things like demand I post on the board immediately and prove everything about myself now if I want them to stop harassing me. Like a military commander should be taking marching orders from a bunch of ignorant punks like them. Another thing those ignorant little morons like to come at me with is how much longer those influencers have been working on this than I have, and how I just need to put in the work like they did, which is pretty annoying, not gonna lie. Because I started this 12 years ago when I was 17, and I have been busting my ass ever since. Pretty much my entire youth was spent risking my life and fighting the most vicious people on earth. So when those Q Pharisees and their followers act like they've done more for this movement than I have, understand that they are engaging in a form of stolen valor, something that myself and every other real warrior despises. If you don't know what that is, stolen valor is when idiots who didn't spend a single second actually fighting a war claim that they contributed more to winning it than the people who actually fought on the front lines. It's one of the lowest and most pathetic grifts that anyone can pull. And not only are those Q Pharisees stealing my valor, because I could ignore that, they're also using their platforms to stir up violent threats against my family members, to such an extreme degree that FBI agents came over to check on us yesterday. Yep, you heard that correctly. Those ignorant Q Pharisees incited so many threats against us that some FBI agents had to come over and check on us to make sure we were okay. A great example of exactly how egotistical and selfish those stupid Q Pharisees really are. Despicably so, really. The good news about the FBI checking on us was it gave me the opportunity to go on the record and tell them the exact same story that I've been telling you guys. How we work for the Defense Intelligence Agency, how I'm running a live military intelligence operation called QAnon, how I have drugs, guns, and explosives in my house, and how I hacked Terry Bradshaw's medical records and posted them on the internet with impunity. All on the record to the FBI agents. I even showed them some of my videos. So now there's a hard paper trail for all the thick-headed Q Pharisees to check into. Meaning that those of you who still don't believe my story can feel free to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI for that house call and see exactly what I told those agents. Keep in mind that it's a federal crime to lie to the FBI, so the fact that I'm not under any sort of investigation whatsoever should be Q-proof enough for anyone who can't wait until Greenland. Looking at you, Praying Medic. Praying that you will get your head out of your ass and start responding rationally to empirical facts. But based on how you've acted thus far, I don't really have high hopes. Which is why I need to make something very clear. I need you Q Pharisees to understand that I will not be tolerating the incitement of violent threats against my family for any longer. It's bad enough that your ignorant followers are jamming my inboxes with their bitchy messages and making it impossible for me to respond to people who actually like me. But it's even worse that they're inciting people to come after my family. So I want to make it very clear to all you selfish little Q Pharisees right now that if this continues, I'm going to start hitting you back 10 times as hard very soon. Not something I want to have to do, but your incitement is totally out of hand. So if it continues, I will be forced to take drastic measures to protect both my family and my operation. Doesn't matter how long you've been following Q or how hard you've worked to get the word out. You continue inciting violence against my family members, there will be severe consequences. Online and in person. Please do not make the mistake of thinking that I can't find you just because you don't have your name in your Twitter handle. Especially if you live right across town from me. Cough, cough, Praying Medic. I mean, it's like, are you retarded, bro? For those of you who don't know, I've been extremely nice to Praying Medic. I actually DM'd him a link to the Amorphous Archive about 2 years ago, but he was too cool to look at it for more than 10 seconds. And about 3 months ago, I even offered to let him hold a weekly Q meetup in the training center at my office in Tempe, which he found interesting and briefly considered before declining my offer because he didn't want to share the stage with someone he didn't feel was on his level. That's how egotistical and untethered from reality this little Praying Medic clown is. I have given him so many opportunities that no one else got, and he rejected them all, like a little dumbass. Which is why I won't feel bad about making a flamboyant example out of him if he doesn't rein in his rabid little fanboys immediately. So with all that being said, I'd like to end the night with another Q-proof and tell you about that Ephesians verse that Q Plus has been using. My elementary school was a front run by the DIA called Bethany Christian School. It was attached to this church over here called Bethany Christian Church, which has since then, both the school and the church have been sold and renamed. We used to stand in this courtyard right here, everybody in my school, every morning, and we would stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we would recite that Ephesians verse about the full armor of God every single day. Obviously, I'm not going to give you guys any of their names right now, but if you did ask any of my classmates, I guarantee you any of them could confirm that that was in fact what we did every single day. Our school is really small, so we pretty much knew everybody. My mom was even the vice principal at one point. Now, it goes without saying that none of my classmates or their parents ever knew about this place actually being a DIA front, so seeing this video is probably going to shock a lot of them. Another interesting fact is that across from my elementary school on this highway that got built around the time I was little, it's got these weird pyramid symbol things on it. And these are only along this short stretch of highway that is next to the school. Make of that what you will. So I'm throwing down a challenge to all the ignorant Q Pharisees that are calling me a LARP right now for them to try to explain where that Ephesians verse came from. If they know so much, why did Q use that? They all blocked me like little pansies, obviously, but why don't you ask them to give us an explanation of that? And of course, don't forget to copy the text in the description below and send an email to Dado. Happy Friday, everyone, and I'll see you next time. So today, I decided to get real weird with you guys. We are going to be talking about some spooky new Space Force stuff. Specifically, some fun little future weapons, commonly referred to as UFOs. Am I really going there? Yep, I'm going there. Now, many of you have already seen the official teasers in the press. For those of you that haven't, I'll give you a bunch of examples in the comments section below, just so you can be on board. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please pause this video and check those out first, so that the rest of this makes sense to you. But long story short, the US Navy released footage last year of a real paranormal encounter some fighter pilots had with a real UFO. It made headlines in almost every major news outlet worldwide, from BBC to CNN. But most people never even heard about it, because our news was too busy telling us about how Orange Man bad to focus on hard evidence of UFOs for longer than a day. Amazing how the US Navy can literally release footage and official statements about these things, yet no one in our kangaroo media cares for more than a day. They can even establish official military guidelines and hold official briefings in Congress. But no matter what happens, 24 hours later, our kangaroo media will go straight back to talking about how Orange Man bad. The people who bring us our news are oftentimes the most vapid, shallow, and chronically uncurious people on this earth, which is a big part of the reason that we're doing the QAnon op this way in the first place. See who is shallow and will ignore real information if it's not served up to them the way they're used to receiving it, or from the people they are used to receiving it from. And who will follow the facts no matter who they come from or what kind of crazy place they lead. Think of it as something like a massive dose of intellectual humility for a global population desperately in need. With that in mind, let's dive in. The first thing you need to know is that time is not linear or constant like many of us were raised to believe that it is. Time is actually a dynamic force controlled by gravity, meaning that on planets bigger than ours, time moves slower because the planet has more mass and therefore more gravity, and therefore that gravity grabs time firmer and slows it down more. So they experience time at a slower rate. Like if we went to a planet twice as big as the Earth, the time there would move half as fast, meaning that 1 day there would equal 2 days here on Earth. Like in that movie Interstellar with Brad Pitt, where he goes to that giant ocean world for like a day and he comes back and it's like 30 years later. Spooky concept, right? And time isn't just different between us and other planets. It's even slightly different between different places here on Earth. Did you know that if you were to stand at the top of the Empire State Building, that you would be experiencing time slightly faster than if you were to stand in the lobby instead? That's because, closer to the Earth's surface, Earth's gravity is slightly stronger, grabbing the time slightly tighter and causing it to move slightly slower. The technical term for this is time dilation. Time dilation, or the difference between the rate at which objects at sea level are experiencing time and objects at other various high altitudes are experiencing time, is a real-world factor that has been accounted for by rocket scientists and satellite engineers since the 50s. GPS navigation would not work properly without accounting for time dilation. So how is that relevant to UFOs? Well, I'll tell you how. It's because those UFOs are not in fact UFOs at all. They are time machines, and they aren't made by aliens. They're made by humans in the future, the very near future. That's why the military has been ordered to ignore them since the 50s, because they didn't want to cause an adverse butterfly effect. Now, I won't get into exactly what a butterfly effect is right now because it's kind of a complicated thing to explain. But luckily, there's a movie called The Butterfly Effect starring Ashton Kutcher that can give you kind of an idea of what I mean. The way you could tell they're time machines, without just taking my word for it, is with physics equations. If we look at the empirical data provided by the Navy about the UFO's aerial maneuvers, we could use physics equations to easily deduce that they would not be possible without a time machine. The reason is G-forces. G-forces are the extra pull of gravity you experience during a rapid acceleration or in a high-speed aerial maneuver. Fighter pilots and astronauts are generally trained to withstand up to 9 Gs, or 9 times the normal pull of gravity. But that is about the maximum a human body can safely endure. Anything much more than that would cause their body to be crushed and eventually kill them. Which is why we could be so certain that that UFO in those videos is actually a time machine. Because no living or artificial thing could survive the aerial maneuvers that UFO was performing without being crushed by the G-forces that it would create, unless they were warping time. I won't bore you with the gigantic math equation, but suffice it to say that even if your body was made out of solid titanium, the G-force exerted by going from a dead stop here to a dead stop 60 miles away in just a matter of seconds would smash you flat as a pancake and the vehicle you were riding in. The only way it's mathematically possible to move like that is by warping time. So again, just to reiterate, that UFO is not an extraterrestrial alien spaceship. It's actually a human future weapon, one that I will be explaining more about in a future video. So please subscribe and share, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Happy Monday, everyone. Today, I'm going to be elaborating on my personal bio and giving you some more proofs. In my previous video, I told you about how my mother is from Yuma and my grandmother is a refugee from El Salvador named Grace Aragon, who is a bloodline descendant to the Spanish throne. I also told you about how my grandfather ran the private refueling contractor on the base in Yuma that smuggled drugs for the CIA, called Mercury Refueling Inc. His house on Chico Lane, here in Yuma, used to be a CIA job site. When I was little, we had lots of fun playing in these weird trapdoor compartments that he had in his house. The property has been idled and torn down since he moved out, but there used to be these giant 30-foot bush walls around the entire perimeter of the property, which made it very easy to walk behind all the properties along this canal without being seen. My brother and I used to love catching ducks back there because it was so covered that they couldn't fly away from us and we could get them when we were little. Growing up, I also used to love sitting in the back of his truck at the end of this runway here at the Yuma MCAS base, watching fighter jets take off over our heads. My grandfather, or Oppie as we used to call him, was very sneaky, so most of my family didn't find out about any of this until recently with you guys. My dad's parents are immigrants, and his first language was German. His dad, my other grandfather, Walter Steinbart, was actually a German SS officer who was given a false identity and evacuated out of Russia by a British intelligence front called Red Cross in a thing called Operation Paperclip. His real name was Bernard Steinbart, and he was a pretty smart cookie. He knew 7 languages and all kinds of stuff about the world. He was an ethnic German who was residing in Poland, who was conscripted at gunpoint when the war broke out and served as a tank commander. Everyone thinks I'm yanking their chain when I say that, but that is actually a verifiable fact. One that my entire family is not very pleased about me publicly sharing. My father helped program satellites while attending University of Colorado at Boulder. He then went on to a long career in the semiconductor or computer chip industry, where he worked closely with major defense contractors like Raytheon, selling them the software they use to design computer chips that go inside weapons. Go to any of their electrical engineering facilities in El Segundo, in Tucson, Dallas, Boston, or their R&D facility in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I guarantee you they'll know who my dad is. He's been Raytheon's Vendor of the Year before, and they even fabbed him a personal thank you note into a piece of silicone when he retired last year. Verifiable facts. The company he worked for, called Mentor Graphics, also sells SpaceX and Air Force Research Labs the software that they use to design their electronics. Verifiable fact. Growing up, we had a family friend named Boots Nelson, who was a lawyer from Tucson that would let us rent out his beach house in Puerto Penasco, a small little Mexican beach town about a 4-hour drive south from Phoenix. It was like a second home to me growing up. We spent lots of time down there. One of my favorite things to do as a kid was to go catch octopuses in these tide pools. The house next door was where the owner of the marina in town lived, someone who was deeply involved with the Sinaloa cartel. During my time in Puerto Penasco, I actually discovered a CIA trap house down the street from where I would stay that I like to call the Delta Lair because it's got this big, Delta triangle thing pointed out. This house is used to store drugs that are then driven on quads down this snazzy beach driveway thing and over to a big nightclub down the way called Baja, where they are sold. Shipments are originally loaded onto small fishing boats on the docks in Mazatlan, Mexico, down here, and moved up along the coast, either being passed through the marina in town or through this estuary about 20 minutes east of it. There's this big Freemason symbol in the estuary that you can see from the air, which is a big marker. It shows traffickers where to go to avoid the Mexican military highway checkpoint, which is about right here, en route to Caborca. On the way to Caborca, there's even this small municipality called El Coyote. Shows you how serious the government is about stopping this problem, huh? Across from that estuary, there's also an unmarked runway that from the highway looks like just a dirt road. Shipments coming through the estuary route either get loaded onto cars and driven over to Caborca, or they get loaded onto planes at that unmarked runway and flown to Stellar Air Park in Chandler, Arizona, where there's no air traffic control to watch, and where there's a neighborhood full of houses with these attached private hangars for storage. My first missions at age 17 and 18 were to Cuba. I went there twice before Americans were legally allowed to go. I spent a lot of time in Havana and a lot of time in Santa Clara, where I met an IT guy who worked for a regional official who is now their president. Someone I keep in touch with to this very day. And someone that I'm going to use as a back channel to go squash McNasty's beef with Cuba after this is all over. After high school, I was planning on going to the Air Force Academy. I took pilot lessons and Krav Maga, a mixed martial art developed by the Israeli military. But 1 month before I was supposed to leave for Colorado, I had my acceptance revoked because of an overlooked gluten allergy, and I was sent to Arizona State instead, where I met my amazing wife in 2009. We dropped out of college together during our sophomore year to focus on our point-of-sale IT systems business, one we used as cover to gain access to many of the targets of this operation. During the course of this mission, I have personally infiltrated many hotel chains such as Hilton, Marriott, Embassy Suites, Hamilton Inn, and La Quinta. And I left behind some of these Pine 64 sniffer gadgets that I made myself, plugged into their guest Wi-Fi servers, so that I could monitor Backpage ads being posted. I also infiltrated major data centers like this one, an internet backbone data center on 40th Street in Phoenix, run by a company called Iron Mountain, which has military-grade security, including these snazzy little man traps, aka glass tubes, and these iris scanners where you have to stick your face up to the thing and it scans you. Also went to an internet data center run by AT&T that's located in Mesa, Arizona. And also infiltrated a data center in Chandler run by a company called First Data, which is the company that facilitates credit card processing for many major banks and Fortune 500 corporations. In fact, a huge percentage of the international credit card processing traffic happening in the United States today flows through this payment data center here in Chandler. Here's me with the guy who runs it. All right, we're going through the man trap. Oh, we're in the tube with the hand scanner. Right here. And Tony. This is Tony's place.
What's up?
Also been to top secret document warehouses like this one, a massive building with several stories worth of racks, which had tens of millions of classified documents stored. I also have the IT contracts for the White Mountain Apache Reservation, a tribe up in northern Arizona. You can easily Google and verify that. So as you can see, we have been having quite a time out here in Westworld. But I know some of you still aren't convinced. Obviously, the fact that falsely claiming to be a federal agent is a crime that I would get locked in jail for isn't really cutting it for some of you. Nor is the internal-only copy of the Raytheon Handbook. So as a token of good faith, I will provide you all with the configuration script for one of the core ADTRAN routers at Luke Air Force Base in a link below, just to show you that I'm not messing around. Something that I would be in huge trouble for if I wasn't explicitly authorized to do so. But to be completely honest, I could care less what anyone thinks about me, because I am going to be the new commander of the Space Force very soon. The real Space Force, not that fake Air Force one. Meaning you're kind of stuck with me for the next 40 years at least, whether you like it or not. I'm also rich as hell because the DIA let me use those time warping instant messages to tip myself off to this thing called Bitcoin way back when it was just starting out. So I'm pleased to announce that we are not going to be gangbanging or drug dealing anymore to fund our Black Ops. I'm actually just going to pay for them myself. Isn't that fun? I'm that loaded. So believe me if you don't want to. Makes no difference to me. I have a wicked smart, smoking hot wife that's got my back no matter what. I'm building this huge palace in Cave Creek for us to live in, which I will link to below. And I'm bringing the Space Force headquarters out here to Arizona, which will be absolutely epic. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, haters. Because I'm not just associated with Q, I am Q. Me personally, this is my operation. The guy posting on the boards and running point on this whole operation is actually me in the future. Pretty crazy, right? Be on the lookout for official confirmation from the big man upstairs very soon. And in the meantime, all the annoying little parrots squawking, "Naruto comes," can take a seat. Because it also says on that board that disinformation is necessary. Cherry picking parts that you like to attack people that you don't is very ignorant and obnoxious. Understand that I am nowhere near as measured as Q+, and that I'm under no obligation to be nice to any of you. So while I'm generally a cordial fellow who plays nice with others, I will not hesitate to call out egotistical influencers when they are leading people astray. We got lots of great stories to tell, and we are going to be doing so on this YouTube channel over the next few weeks. So please share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. So who really got Donald Trump elected? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't Republicans. It was actually socialists and black people that got Donald Trump elected, believe it or not. Trump didn't win because he was so popular with Republicans. In fact, he was historically unpopular with Republicans. Did you know that he got less total votes than Mitt Romney? Crazy, right? Trump won for one very simple reason. And that was that Hillary Clinton was absolutely reviled by her own voters. So much so that many of them chose not to show up on election day. The reason she's so reviled by her voters isn't because she's a woman or isn't because people are racist or anything like that. The reason she was reviled by her own voters is because they saw her emails. indisputable proof about how she not only doesn't care about her own voters, as that's unfortunately pretty common in Washington, she's actually actively targeting them in some cases. Pretty evil, right? They saw her emails in 2016 because of a precursor operation to QAnon I like to call Operation Burnback. The name was inspired by the firefighting term, where wildland firefighters out in the forest dig out a line and set a small controlled burn back toward a main fire to stop it by pre-consuming all of its fuel in advance. It was organized by yours truly and staffed by a small but elite group of anonymous IT guys and hackers. The idea was that if we could set a fire on the Democrats' far left flank by showing black people and socialists how evil the Democrats really are, that they would be so disgusted that they wouldn't show up on election day. So we used robots and foreign click farms to flood hyper-targeted sections of social media with salacious email clips from Hillary Clinton and the DNC. And it worked like a charm. Hillary Clinton had a historically low turnout, and Trump managed to win the election, the one that the CIA worked so hard to rig against him. Luckily, the people running the CIA at the time were about as incompetent as it gets. Unfortunately for us, not all the nerds we were working with survived to tell the tale. In fact, one of them was brutally murdered, and the rest of us thought that the brazenness of his demise would have warranted a serious investigation by the local police. But they ended up being super corrupt and just looking the other way. I hear IT guys are not the only people having that problem these days. But I digress. The whole point of this video was to say that socialists and black people are the ones who actually got Donald Trump elected in 2016, not Republicans. And can't say for sure, but I'm betting that when Bernie gets brazenly cheated again in this upcoming primary, that they just might stay home again. Or join Team Q. I actually think they're gonna love Q. Pop quiz! If Hillary Clinton possessed a mountain of mortifyingly salacious blackmail on the entire political establishment in Washington, and Q possesses Hillary Clinton's data, then who in fact possesses said mountain of mortifyingly salacious blackmail? I'd like to introduce everybody to a little game I call Green Light the Red Lights, brought to you by the letter Q and the number 17.